My name's Dirk Aaron. I'm General Manager at Clearwater, the Underground Water Conservation District for Bell County. I feel very privileged to introduce a few of our folks that are going to be presenting. I'm glad to see so many of you here. Each presentation has a certain length of time. Do you know what yours is, Chris?
I think they gave me 30 minutes.
30 minutes. So our first presentation will be 30 minutes. It's from a young man that has taken on a pretty important job and role for many of us in the groundwater community, and that's working at TDLR. The thing I love about Chris is the minute I called him recently and didn't know him, he was quick to come to our district, help us revisit inspecting wells, which we do. We require them to be inspected, but if we inspect them improperly, there's a real void. When and if the wells are done improperly, our district sees that as standing in the gap between the well driller and the owner, and standing on behalf of the well owner when needed. And Chris was very good about that, and he's filling some big shoes. I guess David's no longer with TDLR, David Gunn. So Chris will be here. If you want to know more about Chris, in the back of your program is his full bio. But what I did ask him is, where do you come from? He's a Texan, but raised in Nebraska and got his degree outside the state and quickly found his way back home. Chris's last name is Hoiboer.
There it is.
A toy and a boar hog is what I told him. That's my easy way of remembering his name. He's part of the new world we work in. Men that work hard and wear a long beard, they have a lot of credibility in our community, and so that also adds to his mystique. If you would, keep in mind that we're on a tight schedule. Feel free to come and go. Just minimize your talk. Please don't stand at the back, they said, because it does distract the echoes up to the front. What you say in the back may be heard quite easily in the front, is what I was told, so do that. If you would, silence your phones. On behalf of the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts, I'm glad you're here. You may have seen a little bit ago, many of the sponsors and the slides go through there. Last but not least, when you have two things, if you have questions, please hold those to the close of people's presentations, write them down, and we want to leave enough time that those questions get asked. And secondly is you can move to other presentations knowing there's a rotation of the presentations as well. Again, I'm glad to introduce Chris Hoiboer. And are you going to speak in front of this here podium?
Yeah,
all right.
I'll stand up.
Chris, it's all yours. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, thank you. All right, as he said, my name is Chris Hoiboer with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. As some of you may know, the man, the myth, the legend, David Gunn, has decided to retire after 40 years at the beginning or earlier this year. And I have officially accepted his position about a month ago. So I'm going to talk to you guys today a little bit about what we do, what we're here for, how we can help, some of the common misunderstandings we have within the rules, but kind of get into a little bit of detail on a few specific topics. So let's knock it out. Here is our current program list. This is right now we have me, the lead hydrologist, and Larry Estrada, who is the field hydrologist. So we have two individuals who cover the entire state. Obviously, a lot of groundwater districts that I've spoke with understand the necessity for more people. And we needed it 10 years ago, but as you can see with those two empty hydrologist positions, we are in the process of getting more hydrologists, more staff to come out, help groundwater districts, and do what we need to do. It's a long time coming, but we finally have gotten it, and I can't complain now. So we are currently doing interviews for two new positions. So if you guys know anybody, send them our way. We could use the help. But other than that, you can see our phone numbers there. I did get David Gunn's old phone number. So if you guys have him, just switch the name over, you're good to go. I did not get his contacts, so I may not know who you are. Just let me know. But otherwise, we are pushing a lot of situations or a lot of questions that we have to our email inbox, which is on the bottom there, water.well@tdlr.texas.gov. We are, with the situation that has occurred with weather modification, we also run the weather modification program. We have been a little backed up on some of our complaints, but I want to let all the groundwater districts specifically know that doesn't mean not to send stuff in. So we'll get into that a little bit here in a second, but first and foremost, what do? Who are we? We do groundwater protection. We house the license for drillers and pump installers across the state. Along with that license, we regulate or set in place the minimum requirements for well construction and well plugging and pump installation standards. So we set standards that apply for the entire state. On top of that, we also house the abandoned well notification and enforcement program. It is something that we will once again get into with a little bit more detail here in a second. And finally, we work with other agencies, TCEQ, federal agencies, as well as local governments, such as groundwater districts. We actually rely a lot on the communication with groundwater districts for a lot of our complaints. I mean, we are there as a resource for groundwater districts, and we'll get into that here in a second as well. I wanted to show, I'm sure everybody here is aware of what our website looks like. Everybody's been there, but we have updated the website so it looks a little bit different. So if you haven't seen it recently, here is how you get to our page, is regulated industries down at the bottom. If we're dealing with water wells, we will go to that one. Weather modification at the bottom. I know a couple districts in here are using this page as well. And here's what the new page looks like. What I want to bring your attention towards is that file a complaint button at the top. There have been some changes within TDLR, specifically within enforcement, that we are essentially no longer able to open up complaints on behalf of other entities. What that means or what that looks like for groundwater districts is previously we had the ability to open up and essentially be the complainant. We no longer have that option. So if there are situations where TDLR is either asked or needed to get involved with a complaint, I will most likely tell you to go here and file it. Some of the mindset behind it, I mean, I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but it is the rules that we have to follow. There was a lot of complaints that maybe we weren't able to get as much information as we possibly could, and therefore the outcome wasn't the best because we are the complainant that gives testimony, and that's not always the case if it's opened by TDLR. So just some changes internally. If there are complaints, most likely I'm going to push you to here, or worst case scenario, you can just reach out to us and I'll send you a link or send you the document manually. Here is a little bit of a better list of everything that you can find on the webpage. Main ones being here: licenses, well reports, plug-in reports, variance request forms. I know there are some districts that have blanket variances that kind of cover a lot of specifically plugging in their area, but there are situations where districts either are notified about variances or have questions about it. Here's where they are, and otherwise you could just give us a call. Lastly, abandoned wells. This is one that we'll get to it with a little bit more detail here in a minute, but it is on the website. So our different license types and the endorsements that follow. So we have two different licenses, water well drillers and pump installers. They have different capabilities. Drillers are able to drill a well, however, they're not able to install a pump. And the reason I bring this up is there are multiple situations where this is occurring, and I've spoke with districts where this is a common occurrence, right? Where a driller is installing pumps and they don't have a license for pump installation, right? It is a violation. I know, it can be considered minor compared to some of the other stuff that we're dealing with, but it is something that we, as well as just districts, have the ability to enforce. So the endorsements I wanted to bring up because I've also spoke with some GCDs about an ongoing issue that we have identified with our printed licenses. The endorsements that are being printed out on this last cycle, at least as far as we can tell, are not accurately reflecting the actual endorsements the driller has. What this means for you: if you look at a driller's endorsements, trying to verify if they have the pump installers and or drillers based on the situation, and you don't see water wells, it may not be that they don't have the endorsement. It could just be that they need to reach out to us and we get them printed a different license. So it's an ongoing issue. If you get any calls about it, you can send them to us, but it is a known issue that we have individuals working on. Probably not a quick fix because we've known about it for a couple months. So if you hear about it, just send it our way. There are a couple of exemptions for needing a license. The most common one that I want to point out for everybody is if a landowner essentially drills their own well on their own property for their own use. The reason why this is important for groundwater districts is most of the time you are the ones that find out about this occurring before TDLR does. So they absolutely have the right to do that, right? That's what's in the statute, that's what's in the rules. However, the completion standards, the requirements that all of the licensed individuals know, the landowner doesn't, right? But we still hold that landowner to the same completion standards. So essentially, a landowner can and absolutely has the right to drill their own well on their own property. However, they have to follow all of the same rules that drillers do. So if you get that call, right, either have that conversation with them or send them our way so we can kind of explain to them the severity of the requirements that we have, right? There have also been some other cases that we've kind of landed on a decision, specifically like if a company, right, if a corporation owns the property, is that covered? It's a gray area, and it's really previously or historically been dependent on the situation. So once again, I know I'm going to say this a lot, but give us a call. Unauthorized practice, unlicensed drillers. I know it is almost everybody's main complaint. It is one of the biggest issues that we have in the industry, and it's something that as soon as I came on, I kind of pinpointed as a friction point based on our rules. So what I've done is I've had multiple meetings with our prosecutors, with our general counsel to kind of define or outline what we need, right? What information can be provided to give us the best outcome, right? Because when I first started, I was sending these unlicensed activity complaints, and we didn't file or we didn't submit a single one of them because essentially the decision was made that we just don't have enough information. So the reason I bring that up to districts is there are some specific things that we can do that increase that chance of actually going after that unlicensed individual. And that is essentially something tangible, right? If we've been successful with a picture of a license plate, a picture of an individual drilling the well on the property, a check, an invoice, something that ties that person there. And previously we have been kind of relying on the testimony of the landowner, and that has not always been successful. So just to kind of give us the best opportunity for obviously what is one of our biggest problems in the industry is a little bit more work on the groundwater districts, but it allows us to be more successful on the back end for actually getting something done about it. Next is our construction standards. I'm sure everybody is familiar with these and has them memorized, but I will go over a little bit about what our requirements are. I guess it's also a good time to point out the differences between some of the groundwater district rules and TDLRs. So TDLR specifically sets standards that apply for the entire state. However, that doesn't accurately reflect some of the geology or complications that you have locally, right? So what we see is there are groundwater districts, and this is, we've been making a big push to talk to some of these people that have situations that are more applicable in their area, right? To have the groundwater districts implement rules that do exactly that, reflect what's going on in their area. And we see this all the time. There are districts that have spacing requirements. There are districts that have added spacing requirements between wells, which the state doesn't have. So a lot of stuff that helps address some of the stuff that's happening locally. With that said, the interaction between GCDs and TDLR, it is actually in our rules that the licensed individual has to abide by all local ordinances. So if they're breaking a rule that's not in our rules, but it's in yours, TDLR still has the ability to pursue an enforcement complaint. So even if it's not written in our rules, they're breaking your rules, we can go after them together. But let's go a little bit about what this construction requirements are, or what these are. This example is a surface slab and the annular seal underneath it. For a surface slab, the casing has to be 12 inches above ground surface. The slab has to be 2 feet on all 4 sides of the casing and 4 inches thick. Underneath that slab, there has to be 10 foot of annular cement or 2 feet of annular cement on top of 8 foot of bentonite grout. The borehole has to be 3 inches greater in diameter than the outer diameter of the casing. And you'll see this one a lot, but we also recommend 10 foot of annular cement grout above the filter pack. However, local geology kind of dictates that isn't always applicable in some areas, but generally we do recommend it. Here is what a surface slab looks like. As I said before, I'm sure you guys have seen more of these than I have, but this one is a good one. And this is a good example here at the bottom. You can see we are able to do inspections even on surface slabs. And we've run into the situation recently with a couple individuals that are essentially underneath that slab putting rocks, large rocks that hinder our ability to do the inspections. And that one was actually decided that that is a violation. So it's something that we're looking at adding, but just something to be aware of. The drillers are coming up with new ways to hurt the process. Next, we have a surface sleeve. The surface sleeve has to be 12 inches above ground surface, 12 inches below. The casing still has to extend, and I know it's not on this example, but the casing does have to extend above that sleeve requirement. And some of this stuff I'll get into some of the presentations we do earlier or later, but we do have much more in-depth guide to this kind of stuff if that's something your district would be interested in. With the sleeve specifically, it has to be 2 inches greater in diameter than the outer diameter of the casing and made of 3/16 inch steel or Schedule 80 sun-resistant PVC. The reason I specify sun-resistant, and I'll show you, I'll just skip ahead here, is this picture on the left. That is what sun-resistant Schedule 80 PVC looks like. I know it's a big problem in certain areas of the state where drillers are claiming that they don't know this, and we've also been brought information that essentially says there are manufacturers that produce sun-resistant Schedule 80 that's not this color. I have spoke with many manufacturers that have made this claim, and I have not found a single one. If you run into this situation and the driller is claiming that it meet the qualifications, let me know, and I'm more than happy to kind of dive into it. But at this point, the only sun-resistant Schedule 80 that we see and know is that dark gray color. And then at the top, you see the steel sleeve. Everything looks good here. Underneath that surface completion, the same thing applies. The 10 foot of annular cement or 2 feet of annular cement on top of 8 foot of bentonite grout, borehole 3 inches greater in diameter than the outer diameter of the casing. And one other thing that's not on this slide, the seal, so essentially that sleeve above land surface does have to be filled with cement as well. There can't be that gap to allow water to sit on the top. Just some intricacies with the construction standards that aren't always easily apparent. But here's the examples again. And I know some districts are much more familiar with this and some aren't. I mean, we see it a lot in the Panhandle, North Texas. Pitless adapters. We do allow pitless adapters, and essentially what this looks like is from that 90, there'll be a pit with all of the typical surface equipment that you would see inside of that pit. It's to keep it underground to reduce the probability of freezing. The construction standards for pitless adapter does change a little bit. There's no requirement for surface completion. You do have to have the ability to get in and make or fix issues, and you can't do that if there's surface completion. What we do require is 20 foot of cement underneath that 90. With these 3 previous surface completions, you have your setbacks that we set in place. Once again, this is the perfect example of some of the stuff that we have districts adding additional rules on, right? A district can put it in their rule that it can be anything more stringent than ours, right? So they can always require more. They can't do anything less than this. But those setbacks are 50 foot from the property line, 150 foot from any concentrated source of potential contamination. That is intentionally left vague to give us the ability to interpret that for the necessities. 100 foot away from any septic system, absorption field, or spray area, and 50 foot from any watertight sewage and liquid waste collection facility. There is also the opportunity for the alternate annular seal. And what that looks like is either pressure cemented to 100 foot or the top of the production zone. Some aquifers, the production zone is much closer to the surface than 100 foot. So in those situations, we have something that covers it. What this does, it also, I know it's not on this slide, but we do still require the surface completion, one of the 2 types in this sort of annular seal. And with this annular seal method, here is what your setbacks are changed to. So 5 foot away from the property line and 50 foot away from anything else. This is the #1 reason why we get variances. And for those who aren't familiar with what variances are, it's essentially a formal way to allow drillers or people in the industry to do something that is outside of our rules. When we get the variance in, we determine what's going to be the best way to still protect groundwater and allow them the ability to do that. Like I said, I know some districts have blanket variances for plugging, and there are some others that just have blanket variances for distance requirements. I mean, there's a bunch. So if you or your district have any questions about it, give us a call and we can work it out. Next, we'll lead into injurious water. It's another hot topic, another friction point that we have seen recently. We do have the ability or the requirement for drillers and pump installers to notify us when it's encountered. However, the problem is there's technically not the requirement for them to test water, which is something that we're looking at addressing in the future. But currently, what we do have is a set of rules that essentially dictate how the well is completed if injurious water is encountered. And here in this example, you have your production zone, and above it is the bad water. Essentially, our requirement is that you seal that injurious water off, not allowing those 2 aquifers to mix. In the situation where you have your production zone that's above the injurious water, you drill too far, plug back, it's sealed off, there's no interaction. And there are some instances where certain industries don't necessarily care about the water quality. It's more about quantity, and in those instances, we see them typically producing injurious water, so water that's not suitable for drinking, right? And in those instances, we still require the fresh water above, if it is there, to be sealed off. This kind of leads into one of our biggest hot topics with the program, and that is commingling. I know I've had multiple conversations with a lot of districts about it. There are some where it's much more prevalent than others. And if you have, or you are one of those districts and you've looked at what this rule says, it is extremely vague and doesn't necessarily detail or allow thinking outside of the box. It's really just, is this occurring? Then it's against the rule. And this is another thing that we're looking at addressing. It essentially, the way that it's currently written is it penalizes areas where there have been additional geologic exploration, right? So if you've gone in and defined more zones within the same aquifer, this rule specifies aquifer or zone. So the more geologic research and definition that we have, the further hindered you are by this rule. So we know it's a problem. We're looking at making some changes. There have been some movement with some of the rules that have been passed, or some of the laws that have been passed recently, that might give us an opportunity to add a numerical value to this, which I think would help the industry immensely. But if you have any questions about it, we do have the ability to test for this and enforce these types of complaints. So it is something that we can do if the district doesn't have the ability or would rather just work with or have TDLR take care of it. we're more than happy to. Next, we do cover plugging. We have a few requirements for plugging wells. One of them is, or the first one is that the surface completion is entirely removed, right? So there's nothing on the surface that can still be seen, right? Past that, we have the requirement for all removable casing to be removed. And this one, if you're familiar with the industry, this is difficult, right? So this is something that in most of the times where individuals are plugging wells, these are old abandoned wells, wells that have been there for 50, 100 years, right? And in those instances, that casing is not going to be removed. It's not going to be removable. What our requirement is that the attempt for removing the casing be made. And if there is the situation where I know that that casing can't be removed, they know that casing can't be removed, the current process is still to get that water or that driller or pump installer who can plug wells to submit a variance, to essentially allow them to do something outside of those rules. And finally, it has to be pressure cemented from the bottom to the top. If any one of these three things can't be met, this is another big point that we have for variances. So if you're running into it, you got questions, feel free to reach out. Next, we'll go over abandoned and deteriorated wells. This is another, once again, I'm just bringing hot topics to y'all today. This is another big issue, and I know a lot of districts, there are some that have many, many more of these, and there are some where, you know, there's not that many. But across the state, there are much more. It says the estimate was 100,000. If you're in the field or you have staff in the field, it is much, much more than that. And these are problematic, not only for public safety, but also for water quality. So we have a process to essentially get something done with these, require that something be done. It is a little bit of a longer process. We allow the landowner 6 months to do something about it. So it might be a little bit of a longer complaint, but we are more than happy to help the district out or take over these cases if we run into these. What do they look like? They look like everything, anything that you would imagine. PVC sticking up out of the ground. It was an abandoned well. Large diameter here at the bottom. The top right, you can see no idea what happened with that. Some sort of fire, but that well was still running. So even though it's still operational, that well is considered to be deteriorated because it doesn't meet the current standards for well completion, right? So there's a little bit of overlap with what the definition of an abandoned or deteriorated well. Once again, if you guys got any questions about it, just give us a call. At the bottom left, you can see that one, you know, looks like a good well that's just not capped. That one, we actually had a plug-in report that was submitted for that well telling us that it was plugged. And the groundwater district in the area, you know, obviously went out and did the inspection, and there's no cement to be seen. So that one was a fun situation. Here's actually us on the left out there running a camera down, right? We wanted to verify if there was any cement that they had done. We knew that they didn't remove the casing. We knew that they didn't remove the surface completion, but we wanted to see what was going on. And the claim was made that I believe the casing was collapsed in at about 500, 600 feet, and we were able to verify that, right? So we know that there was something going on, and we just know it wasn't plugged. But finally, how can TDLR help? We are here as a resource for groundwater districts. With us losing David and with us getting more hydrologists and training, there's a lot of weather modification stuff going on. We've been busy, but I don't want districts to think that doesn't mean that you guys aren't the priority, because you are. You are the majority of where we get our cases. We are there for you. It is something that we've recently kind of defined some of the enforcement requirements, like I said, with abandoned wells, but also ultimately the decision of how that interaction between TDLR and the groundwater districts looks is up to the district, right? If there are situations where, you know, local politics are getting in the way of a situation and it's better for you as the groundwater district to not do the complaint, which we've seen that in multiple instances, I don't have a problem being the bad guy. Further, if you want to work on it together, if you want to fully toss it to us, if you want to take the reins and go forward with the enforcement complaint, that's absolutely up to the district to do. If you have any questions, once again, just give us a call. Secondly, we have equipment. We got camera runs. You saw a couple pictures about it. We have pumps. We could do pump tests. There's a lot of equipment that we have that districts may not have access to. We have it. The only requirement is that a complaint is opened up. So if you got any questions, give us a call. And finally, training. I know I'd gone out to Clearwater, and I've gone out to a couple districts recently to do some training to their staff. And those training, it's not just rules, right? We can do rules and regs. We can do abandoned wells. We can do inspections. There's a list of things that we can give presentations or training on to help whatever your needs are. And also including the board, right? If you have a board that has questions specifically about what the requirements are or science behind it, we're more than happy to come out and talk to anybody based on your needs. Just give us a call. And I think that is my time. So I appreciate it. We got a booth over here. If you guys got any questions, just reach out.
I have a quick question. The well completion standard graphics, the pictures, there wasn't a code reference or anything. Where could we find those same graphics? I like having them printed out so that my constituents can come in and say, my well doesn't look like that.
Yeah, no, so I can, it's essentially 76.100 is the rules, but I can give you the graphics that we made if you just reach out on email. I've already gotten approval to be able to send those, so we can actually send the entire presentation. Like I said, there is a much longer and much more in-depth presentation that we give to GCD staff, or field staff specifically, if we want to get into the nitty-gritty about those requirements. So we have that one as well. I think based on your situation, that one might be more applicable. This one is kind of just an overview or an outline. So just be in touch or send me an email and we'll get it to you. Yes, sir.
What do you consider abandoned well? I mean, there's maybe wells out there that don't have pumps in.
Yep.
Yet they may.
Repeat his question.
So the question was, what do we consider an abandoned or deteriorated well? And there is a definition in the rule. Essentially, an abandoned well is a well that is not in use, right? So a well that has that pump out, right? That well, and our rules state that that well can be kept. You just have to cap it. There are situations where the well is not meeting today's standards, right? So some of these older wells that wouldn't, if we went out and did an inspection today, then it wouldn't pass, right? Obviously some issues. So essentially the difference is an abandoned well is a well that is not in use, but can be used in the future, right? That we would consider is meeting our construction requirements. And a deteriorated well is a well that because of its condition cannot be met with the requirements that we have for today's wells, right? It's a vague definition, but it's there to give us the ability to kind of interpret the situation based on the needs. So we have it laid out, and that picture that I had sent about the top right, like I said, that was a working well. They were using that well. But that well is considered deteriorated because it doesn't meet today's standards, right? Because of its condition, could cause harm to the groundwater or surface water in the state. So good question, I appreciate it. Anybody else? Awesome. Well, I appreciate you.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, appreciate you.